Today we're going to look at how to know if we're progressing on our spiritual path. Well, you would think that we do know, but there are times when we wonder, don't we? What are the roadmaps or indicators of awakening? What does spiritual progress actually look like? What can I anticipate from doing my spiritual practice, from my sadhana? How does our life change with spiritual awakening? Well, I often say, of course, that we're already that which we hope to become. And the spiritual path or spiritual practice is really a matter just of purifying the mind and the body. So we realize that truth of what we are as spiritual beings, and that inner light of the divine self shines into the mind, into the body, and we're awake, we're aware in the world doing what we do. So this is described in the Bhagavad Gita in the second chapter, verses 64 and 65. When you have perfect control over the senses, because our interaction with the senses, is rooted in the mind. When you have perfect control over the senses, beyond both attraction and aversion, the mind is anchored instead in the wisdom of the self. So instead of being involved with thoughts and things, awareness is anchored in the wisdom of the self. When you have perfect control over the senses, beyond both attraction and aversion, I want, I don't want, the mind is anchored in the wisdom of the self. Such a person attains equanimity, even-mindedness, peaceful mind. In equanimity, all sorrows are dispelled. One finds freedom from sorrow. The intelligence of one whose mind is in equanimity is established firmly. This is the steadfast wisdom that I have been pointing to. So being able to be receptive to the promptings of the soul, to divine guidance within us. The mind has to be calm in order for us to receive that guidance. And in order for the mind to be calm, we have to be able to skillfully disengage from that wanting creature inside of us that wants and doesn't want, and all of that. Be anchored in the self. So we've been studying the Bhagavad Gita here on Wednesday mornings. You're welcome to tune in. It's online. It's at 7:30 in the morning for about a half an hour. And doors open. Come on in. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the Bhagavad Gita, it's a classic text about the journey of enlightenment that is relevant for seekers from all traditions. It's about this journey of awakening from being ignorant of the truth of what we are, discovering what it is, and then learning how to live skillfully as spiritual beings. Reading the Gita, we get to eavesdrop on this conversation that goes on between the warrior Arjuna, who symbolizes the seeking soul within us, and conversations he's having with his friend and guru, Lord Krishna, who is the higher true self of us, also within us. So we explore this, as an inner dialogue, in a sense, between the lower and higher self within. We listen to Arjuna's dilemmas, to his complaints, and to his questions, and we're naturally then inclined to reflect on our own. In the opening of the story, as many of you know, Arjuna is about to enter a battle that he wants to avoid. He wants to find a way out, so he turns to Krishna for counsel and laments What he sees before him in his life is a no-win situation. He doesn't want to do it. He doesn't want to face the difficulty that he's in. So he asks Lord Krishna for advice. And Arjuna's moment of crisis, then, we look at our own lives, and most of us see that it's familiar. We come to a time in our life where we don't know what to do. We've gotten ourselves in a situation that feels beyond our capacity to navigate. We can't see the way forward. We feel confused or anxious, and basically we want to escape suffering. Sometimes, we even identify a theme with our suffering, like, oh, I've been here before. I've done this before, and now I see it again. Here I am. How can I stop making this same mistake? Stop what I'm doing that is bringing me sorrow or suffering. So, searching for a way to end suffering is a great motivator for stepping onto the spiritual path. It's a common one, perhaps the most common. We're looking for freedom from confusion, from suffering, from sorrow. And I should qualify that I think at this beginning stage, when I say we're looking for freedom, I should qualify it by saying, but not really. Usually what we're looking for is situational, but not transformational. We're looking for the situation in our life to change, and we're not quite up to what has to change, which is us. We're looking for freedom from a particular problem, not necessarily looking for liberation from the source of our suffering, our misguided way of thinking. So initially, it's natural we look for improvement in our human condition and not liberation from it. And this is marvelously demonstrated by Arjuna asking for Krishna's advice and then refusing to take it. What should I do? We ask God, what should I do? I'm so unhappy. I'm really struggling. What should I do? And the response comes from the inner self. And then we say, no. Most of us bring expectations with us about what we want the spiritual path to provide for us. We have our list of what we want. And we're looking for a better way to do what we want to do and avoid what we don't want to do. And we think the spiritual path might just be what we need to give us the tools to do what we want better. And then we have the idea that we'll bring God on as our subcontractor to help us out. And then, we discover that while the spiritual path does support skillful living, it's just not necessarily in the way that we thought it was going to be. So when we want to know how we're progressing on our spiritual path, we need to understand that spiritual progress is not measured in the same way that success in our worldly goals is measured. In fact, I think spiritual progress is ultimately not measurable. Because it is spiritual. It's not material. It's a process. It's not a task that we can check off. But I think it is possible for us to experience some changes along the way as we engage in spiritual practice and the mind begins to be purified. And we can attribute these changes to our spiritual practice. Baba Haridas, the sage of Mount Madonna Center, wrote in his book, The Path to Enlightenment is Not a Highway. He wrote, if you wish for spiritual development, then start now and never stop. Don't wait for an auspicious day to come. Lofty spiritual ideas may seem unattainable, but by firm determination, devotion, and enthusiastic effort, one can achieve the goal. If you have to hike to a mountaintop, then you walk through the hills and dales, woods and rivers, snowy cliffs and ravines. You face all the odds and make it to the top. The spiritual path is not a highway. One of the indications that we can see in ourselves and in Arjuna in the Gita is a progressive commitment to the spiritual life and an opening to change and transformation. So Arjuna's first question that we encounter in the Gita is, how do I get out of this? How do I avoid this difficulty? But then his line of questioning proceeds to wondering what spiritual mastery looks like. He starts to make the shift from what do I do, what can I do, to what might I become? And that's a really important shift. So he asks Krishna what an enlightened person is like. How do they experience higher states of consciousness? How do they talk? How do they sit? How do they move around in the world? And we can tell by those questions that he's starting to wonder, what does enlightenment look like? What does the shift in consciousness look like? What will my life be like? Will I be able to engage in these higher states of consciousness and still hang out with my friends and still keep my job? What does this look like? What am I going to be interested in? What will I talk about? One of the first signs of progress we have is that shift in our line of questioning, moving from how do I get out of this mess that I have put myself in, or that I believe other people have put me in, to what would it be like to live as an awakened being? What would my life be like? And we begin to imagine enlightenment then as a possibility and commit ourselves to that journey in earnest. And we discover then, of course, that it's a transformational process that most often takes place over time, like a sunrise. As the mental field is purified and the inner light of the divine self illumines our thoughts and our speech and our action. With the regular practice of meditation and study and self-discipline and surrendered receptivity to divine grace, here are 4 signs of progress we can experience. And I had fun putting them together with alliteration, just for those of you who love language like I do. The first on my list is more peace, less perturbability. More peace, less perturbability. So meditation offers us the direct experience of our essential nature, which is peace itself. That's the calling card of the divine self, peace. And the more we experience and know this truth of our being and know that inner peace, the more luminous and even-minded we become. Back to those opening verses of the Bhagavad Gita. That's the key to finding freedom from sorrow, having a peaceful mind. Why? Because we can see more clearly where our thoughts and speech and action will lead, and we can make better choices. We don't lose our cool so easily. We're not so easily provoked. We can respond to people and circumstances rather than react. We can pause rather than pounce. We have a new awareness of what we are as spiritual beings and don't have to take things that are happening so personally. That's the ego thing. We start to have freedom from that. It's not all about me. That's such a relief when we begin to discover that. The poet Mark Nepo has a beautiful poem from his book, Reduced to Joy. He writes about this, more peace, less perturbability that comes from abidance in the divine self. He wrote, "When I have access to the place within me that is lighted, I don't have to speak heatedly. I can just give away warmth. When I have access to the place within me that is lighted, I don't have to speak heatedly. I can just give away warmth. When I am still enough to brush quietly with eternity, I don't have to speak of God. I can just offer peace to those around me." Okay, second on my list, greater discernment and less disappointment. We begin to see more clearly the transitory, changeable nature of everything in the world, and we understand that they cannot then provide us lasting happiness or security. So we stop expecting that from things in the world, from people or from circumstances, and we start to rely on God, the source of life, and not the appearances of life. With this greater insight, we begin to see our mistakes or our shortcomings as part of the path, as part of learning. We see ourselves as a work in progress. And those mistakes that we've made no longer consume us, and neither do the mistakes or shortcomings of others. We start to develop compassion for ourselves. And life becomes, and when we do that, life becomes larger and sweeter when we don't take ourselves so seriously. We are less invested in the self that needs defending. We stop defending ourselves. What a relief. Okay, number 3, more faith, less frustration. This, I think, comes through in experiencing encounters with divine grace. We start to notice how life supports us. And we even begin to expect grace, to look for it and to affirm it when we see it. And we have less frustration when things don't go our way, because now we suspect that there's more than our little way, that there's a greater way at work in our life, and we begin to have a supportive relationship with the infinite. Number 4, we start to be motivated by purpose and not by problems. Our actions are motivated by higher purpose and not by problems. So we progress from having a supportive relationship with the infinite to having a cooperative relationship with the infinite. We start moving from seeking how we can be supported to how we can actively be of service, how we can serve life. Our life begins then to blossom with surrendered devotion. Transformation begins. The thread that runs through these 4 points, really that strings them together, is surrender. Surrender of the idea of the separate self, surrender to God, letting go of the ego-based motivations in our life. When we open to God, not as a separate reality, but God as our life. When we open to that, God as our life, God as the life of all, then we're no longer led by fear. Ego is based in fear. When we can begin to let go of that, start to rely on God, start to surrender to God, then we begin to free ourselves from fear. And then we're free to love. We're free to grow. We're free to change. We're free to be happy. Happy for no reason. Here's what happens. We give up our commitment to suffering. And we begin to live. Okay, here's the 4 signs. More peace, less perturbability. Greater discernment, less disappointment. More faith, less frustration. Motivated by purpose, not by problems. God is always guiding us into new life, into what Yogananda called ever new joy. It's always there, as long as we can let go of the past, of who we thought we were. Just let it go. Live your life today without the baggage. I'm going to end with a poem by Fred Lamott. He said, "When you opened your eyes this morning, you broke every law that made yesterday real. Why insist on being who you were before you took this breath?"